Hello and welcome to another inter-season episode of Moments in Time World War II Edition podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zane Whitney, and I am one of the co-hosts of this podcast. And as is tradition for inter-season episodes, because I am the first voice you hear, that means that I will be leading this episode. Now, before we get going, I want to take a minute to thank our fellow time travelers on our Patreon, as we would not be able to do this podcast without you and your support. But of course, more on that at the end of the episode. Now, I am not the only host on this episode, as I have the ever brilliant Chris along for the ride. You all right, Chris?
I wouldn't say brilliant, but yeah, no, I'm good, thanks, mate. How are things with you? How was your trip to London?
Uh, it was eventful. Hopefully in a good way. I'd like to think that I found some things that are going to be helpful to make the picture clearer, but also, I get to also state that while I was gone, I have to now change my, usual thing with Alina of saying all good stories start with so I was with Alina in Poland now has to include so I was with Alina in Italy.
Yeah, yeah, she's told me stories.
So yeah, but it was a good trip. Glad to be home. Now it's back to writing and all the fun stuff. But are you excited about this episode? Because I know I am.
I am indeed, yes. Yeah, it's something I don't know a lot about, which actually covers a large amount of subjects.
Well, I think it's also, I would argue that we're kind of doing something similar to what you did with Narvik, is that we're familiar, a lot of us are, with the North Africa campaign in some capacity, right? But we don't know a lot about it. Kind of like, we've heard of Narvik, we've heard of Norway, but we really don't talk about it
No,
as often as we probably should, or in the way you that we did with those episodes. So that's why I'm excited about this, because you're right. It's a subject I was completely unaware of. So why don't we just get right down to it? So do you want to introduce our very special guest?
yeah, tonight or today, depending on what time you're listening to this, we have Liz Gardner. She is a PhD candidate at King's College in London in the Defence Studies Department. Her thesis examines, wait for it, the Libyan Arab Force, an indigenous Senussi formation between the British Army in the North Africa campaign from 1940 to 1943. She has an MA in archaeology from the University of Edinburgh in 2001, and she has been a commercial archaeologist and illustrator for the last couple of decades, and is now an adjunct lecturer in history and anthropology at Olympic College near Seattle. So, Liz, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Very well, thank you. It's my first time on a podcast. I will say I'm slightly nervous, but I'm looking forward to talking about my research.
No, awesome. That's great. So we're I think we're more excited than you are, which is always a plus. So, I guess to get us initial introduction, can you introduce to us the group that you're looking at within the Libyan Arab Force that operated between 40 and 43?
So yes, so the Libyan Arab Force was a formation of Senussi Arabs that volunteered to serve in the British Army. And we're not talking about a small number of them. We're talking about 6,000 of them. And they've never had a unit history written. So they do appear in various different parts of the historiography, but they've never really had their own work done. And the kind of premise of a lot of my work is the fact that there's a connection between an organization called 102 Military Mission and the Libyan Arab Force, and that connection was lost. And 102 Military Mission was a military intelligence formation. It was sent out by Military Intelligence Research in London. And so this has opened up a huge amount of information about this unit to build this unit history. And what's very interesting about them is that they were at huge risk going into the campaign because they were Italian colonial subjects. So if they got caught by the Italians, they were summarily executed. There was massacres of their families if anyone discovered that they were volunteering for the British. But despite this, you have this huge number who volunteered. And so I'm writing up their history. Nearly finished, I hope.
Awesome. So I guess my first question, how did they know to volunteer, or how were they sought after by the British? Like how did they what was the way they came into the force? Or do you know?
I do. So most of the Senussi, or if anyone's ever heard of the Senussi, they'll know about the Senussi campaign in the First World War. So in North Africa, the Senussi fought against the British. And so in 1916, they made their peace with the British, but they were known as excellent guerrilla fighters. And so this connection was always known about between the Senussi as this insurgent organization, and the Senussi are not a tribe. They're an Islamic tariqa, which is a brotherhood. The name, the etymology of the word comes from the name path. So it's kind of like an order, like the Franciscans or the Dominicans, but it's secular as well. So it's not just one ethnic group. And their leader was Idris el-Senussi. So as Italian rule comes into operation and the fascists start to take over, Idris el-Senussi ends up as a refugee in Egypt. And the British authorities are very aware of him being there. And in fact, it's Ralph Bagnold of LRDG fame who talks about how important it is to have the Senussi on side. So from fairly early on into the 30s, the British are looking at the Senussi going, you know what? If things get hairy, we need them on our side because we can't fight them and the Italians as well. And Idris is very pro-British, and he's also there in Egypt. So they keep this connection with Idris. In fact, they're paying Idris's cousin out of secret funds to train guerrillas that Idris does not know about because he's had a row with his cousin and won't work with him, to make sure that there are trained guerrillas ready to actually go straight into operation with the British when war breaks out. So that's how it begins. And then as soon as war breaks out in June 1940, they mobilize this group. And then on the 9th of August 1940, it's formally raised as, well, it was called the British Arab Force when it was raised, which confused everybody. And that's why they kept changing its name. And it's best known as the Libyan Arab Force, but it went through 3 or 4 different iterations of name. That's another reason why it's hard to find it, because you can't find the right name.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, it's something the British are very good at, of how can we cause problems for our enemy? Oh, I know, we'll bribe the locals and we'll get them to fight for us.
Yes.
Until we can turn up with a proper army.
Well, that's actually, but that's also part of, they get hidden because everyone thinks they're a colonial gendarmerie, like British have always done. And so one of the reasons why nobody really talks about them is, oh, they're just a colonial gendarmerie, but they're doing much more fun, sneaky beaky, interesting stuff, including MI9 operations.
Oh, cool.
Interesting.
What kind of operations were they getting involved in then?
So they were involved in lots of stuff. They as you have with so much of the British Army across North Africa, if you know a lot about what was going on in North Africa, there's a dispersed pattern of operations. And so these 6,000 men are dispersed they only operate by battalion, and there were 4 battalions. A 5th one was raised, but it never left Egypt. They're dispersed by battalion, and then they work at a company level, and then 2 or 3 men go off in various different places. So they're doing regular operations alongside they took over the Egyptian Frontier Forces operations. So they end up garrisoning Jirabab Oasis. They go and help out at Siwa. They end up helping with the defense of Mersa Matruh, and they actually got stuck in Tobruk. So they were at the siege of Tobruk. But they were also doing all kinds of liaison operations. So one of the first places I found them was actually in the Gavin Mortimer recent book of David Stirling, because they were out with the SAS. They were out there telling people, helping with liaison with the locals. They are then doing road watching. They take over MI9 from 1942. So they're doing enemy and friendly prisoner of war activities, escort duties. They're literally everywhere. You seem to find 2 or 3 of them when you start to look but nobody's been looking because you find them in these little tidbits in lots of different books. And then as you start to bring it together, you start to go, oh my goodness, there's this huge history that just has disappeared between the cracks. So regular, irregular, colonial gendarmerie, policing, everything. So they're everywhere. That's a terrible answer to the question, but they are everywhere.
No, it's good to know that they're kind of ubiquitous, because some organizations just do one thing and they do it really well, and then they get sent off to do something they're not very good at and get wiped out. And it's just, again, it's like a footnote of, yeah, and then these guys did this. So
yeah.
Having them everywhere. I mean, were they easy to research with them being everywhere, or were they just sort of, again, little footnotes everywhere?
Even my supervisor said that I had a difficult task with it, because it's been taking tiny little oblique references and building it up. And I have as I'm sure so many researchers do, I have my spreadsheets of doom that just gather all the tiny little bits. One really key piece of information that really helped was I managed to get a copy of a nominal roll of all the volunteers from an Arabic researcher from the University of Benghazi, which I had to have translated, because I realized trying OCR and trying Google Translate that you needed a transliteration, not just a translation, because you got really ridiculous names like Mohammed, Placid Lake, Exploding Kitten. And he's like, that is certainly not a real name. So I had to, there was a very excellent Arabic teacher in Yemen who then translated these all for me. So I got this list and then was using that to pull in from war diaries, from everything, to bring it together and then take those and create chronologies. So it was weird. Like most people think when you think of doing a doctorate that I'll write my first chapter or my second chapter, but I couldn't do any writing at all until I had all of these bits put together. And then, of course, with the literature review as well, you go through it and you go, but there's like nothing there. And what's there is wrong. In fact, there's been an article published this year, a journal article. In fact, there's and another one in a book. One of them talks about the LAF having 15,000 members, and another one talks about them having 600 members. And no one's really gone and looked. So it's been pretty hard to pull it all together and then find a coherent story. And there are still big gaps, unfortunately, but it's better than it was before. And I'm avoiding talking about Popsky because that's what most people go. And I know I'm gonna have to go there, but
Because I was gonna make you go there. Because it's juicy.
Popsky is a Polish ice cream company, isn't it?
I think so.
Really?
I think so. I'll have to look it up.
I just made that up, but for fun. But
I'll come back to you and see. Here.
if it's real.
So Popsky is Vladimir Penyakov. So I suppose I should probably explain who he is. Vladimir Penyakov, he is obviously known as Popsky. He's known because he founded a private army known as Popsky's Private Army. I can see Zane laughing, so I'm assuming that there is actually an ice cream company. Go on.
But not in Poland.
No?
It's a brand of ice pops, likely originating from Kolkata, India.
Really?
I love it. Go ahead, continue.
Okay. So I'm never going to think about Popsky the same way. Anyway, so Popsky, the name Popsky was his sort of nom de guerre because the LRDG couldn't say Penyakov on the radio, so they named him Popsky, and that's kind of it stuck. But he's most famous for this special forces really group. There were about 198 men who went through its ranks in its entire history. And it's given credit for the MI9 work that the LAF did. And that's really kind of the big thing that I'm saying in part of my thesis is you can't give Popsky the credit, and you can't give him the credit for one very, very simple reason. Popsky's private army did not exist when the escape lines did. So Popsky's private army didn't come into operational existence until the 5th of December 1942, after El Alamein, after Operation Torch. And so those escape lines didn't exist. But he did help with some of these MI9 operations. If you ever get the chance, and it's still in print, to read his memoirs, do. They are hilarious. They are utterly politically incorrect. He insults absolutely everybody, and I mean everybody, from garlic smelling Frenchmen, etc., etc. He talks about the drunkards of his superior officers. He talks about him as a 40-year-old subaltern that he was responsible for whipping the LAF into shape. All 6,000 of them, obviously. But the trouble is, there is so little information about the LAF that his memoirs, which became a bestseller in 1951, have been the basis of so much of the historiography, because that's all that's readily available about them. So I've been having to go through and go, actually, no, I know everyone thinks is this what happened, but actually this is what I can prove did happen. And Popsky maybe, perhaps, wasn't as important as we think he was in the bigger scheme of the LAF.
It's good to, I always find it good when your research is rupturing popular, because I do think there's a difference between sort of popular history and popular memory and history, and they're like facts and opinions. Everyone blurs them around, so it is really good. I always think you're hitting something right if you're coming away from it going, no, everything we knew about this is bollocks, but this is actually what happened. That's a technical term.
Yeah, well, when it comes to Popsky, it pretty much all is bollocks, to be fair. Like large kahunas of bollocks. Because I think we assume that memoirs tell the truth, especially when you've got war memoirs. You assume that they're all telling the truth. And Popsky's a great example of some of it's misremembered, some of it's just wrong.
Yeah, I have a copy of Kesselring's memoirs that, yeah, kind of proves your point. And Mainstein, actually, and Darren, all three of them. I've got them on my bookshelf, and they're great reads. And there's probably some facts in there, but the facts and opinions sort of blur up a little bit.
Did you say Ravenstein?
No, Mainstein and Guderian.
Oh, Mainstein.
I was going to say single-handedly won the Eastern Front until he was removed.
Ah, yes. This is my trouble of being someone who's coming into Second World War history. I kind of know North Africa, and I don't know as much about the rest as I possibly should. But yes.
I mean, I think we're all in that vein. We get so focused on what we're looking into that we're not able to. Not all of us are global in that way. At least in the beginning, I don't think you can be very global. I would argue you can't really in the initial stages of stuff. You really have to get a footing in one area. I think to be successful to look at something globally, I think you have to be very grounded in something that you already have. That you've got like, okay, here's an angle that I know like the back of my hand, and I can use that as a lens to view all of the other things. But that's, I mean, again, that's just my opinion. But I feel like you'll get there in time if you want to be, I guess. I don't know.
Hopefully.
Yeah, the other thing with the conflict is it's so broad that if you have a good knowledge of what's going on everywhere, you don't at the same time, because you have to have a sort of broad stroke of, oh yeah, and this was happening here and this was happening here, and then someone will just say, and how does that relate to this? Oh, so I that's why I sit in niches. I sit in my niche and I'm happy. I don't know what's going on the other side of the world.
Well, you've kind of hinted at it, and so I'm gonna go ahead and unbury the lead here because you've started talking about your group and how you've, with the research and everything else, of how it's been piecemeal here and there. And
Yes.
given your background, as we said in your bio, that you're an archaeologist by trade, you teach anthropology, you were an archaeological illustrator for many, many years and still kind of are, in your own way. I'll be the one to unbury the lead because I'm excited about it. So, Liz, I have a question. The question is, how on earth does an anthropologist, archaeologist come to this? I want to write something over the Libyan Arab Force in North Africa from 40 to 43.
So this reads like a John le Carré novel. So, are you sitting comfortably is where you probably have to start. And I have to take you back to 1998, which was my grandmother's funeral. And at my grandmother's funeral, three retired generals turned up, which is kind of unusual in most books. And we don't know who two of them were, but we know one of them was John Strawson. So some people may know you might know John Strawson for his book on North Africa, and he wrote a history of the SAS, and was a military historian after, but he was a General Strawson. So at the end of the funeral, he collars my father and he goes, "Now, Michael, you do know about your father, don't you?" And my dad goes, "Oh, shit, they're going to tell me I'm illegitimate." But they didn't. And when they figured out that my dad had no clue what my grandfather was doing during the war, they said, "Well, let's just say he was working behind Rommel's lines in North Africa." And we thought, wow, that's really cool. We'll never know what he was doing. And my grandfather he ended his career as a brigadier. He was the chief education officer in the British Army in the 50s. But his mother was Austrian. So he grew up speaking German, knew German idiot perfectly. And so we thought, oh, well, it must have been that he knew German. But we were right about a language. We were wrong about which one. He spoke Arabic, and he'd been in the Sudan political service in the 1920s and been out in Africa. So we thought we would never ever find out. And about 5, 6 years ago, I was helping my parents to clear out the attic, and I found a handwritten CV of his from 1946, where he identified the unit. And in his CV, it said the Libyan Arab Force, and right next to it, it said 102 military mission. And I thought, awesome, I can go and research it. I can go and find out what he was doing, figure it all out. And the more I looked, the less it made sense. The more I looked, the more they were just saying they were colonial gendarmerie. They weren't doing anything interesting, but there was no mention of 102 military mission. And so this connection from military intelligence back into the Libyan Arab Force was what opened up so many of these doors. So how did I get into actually doing a PhD at King's? Well, I can neither confirm nor deny that it may have involved gin and tonic on a Friday night. And I may possibly have sent an email or two to potential supervisors going, "What do you think?" And then in the cold, sober light of a Monday morning, I got replies. And I started to get replies, and I got one reply, that terribly English, very polite, "Oh, this is a very interesting idea. Would you like to discuss it?" And I thought, well, that's very polite of him. And I got this email back. So I sent my email back saying, "Yes, love to discuss it. When would be convenient?" And this email pinged straight back into my inbox saying, 20 minutes? And so that 20 minutes later, I'm talking to my supervisor, which is Professor Ashley Jackson, who you may know from Kunk as well as his academic credentials. And he is now my supervisor. And so that is how I got into it and how I started on this journey. So I knew there was that academic dissonance in there from the very beginning, but from quite an unusual way, I suspect.
Yeah, it's quite amazing.
And we won't start on my grandmother, who was Free French.
We do need to mention your grandmother because she's again, Chris. It's like you talk to Liz and you're like, how are you an actual person when you have family like this, and not a character from a book?
Okay. So yeah, my grandmother was my grandmother was born in Milan and brought up in Cairo. So she and her father was Free French as well. Her father had been an aviator in the First World War with French nationality, but he disowned his French nationality between the wars, became Italian, and then got it back in 1940. The renaturalization talks about how he was condemned to death by Vichy France. He has an SOE file because he was interrogating Italian prisoners for MI9 in North Africa. So my grandmother, though, was a secretary, and I say secretary because I never in my entire life ever saw her with secretarial skills even once. She was a secretary to a Free French general called General Philibert Collet, who was a Deuxième Bureau general. So it's just kind of interesting that my grandfather's military intelligence and she's working in Free French military intelligence. We don't know what she was doing with Free French, but it's a bit suspicious, to be honest, if they're all military intelligence. And my great grandfather was also military intelligence. But yes, he was called Ferdinand Suarez, and they kind of might have been part of the families that founded the National Bank of Egypt, like a long time ago. We have no money. It's fine. We lost it all in the 1950s with the Suez Crisis, etc. But I have a weird family. You know, from an English girl from Buckinghamshire, it's an unusual family to have. Yes.
I really wish I could see Chris's face right now.
I feel I need to have a word with my ancestors and ask them what the hell they thought they'd been doing for the last 100 years. We've not done anything half as interesting.
Well, they could have given it a rest, you know. It might have made my life easier.
As far as the unit is concerned, and then I'll let Chris
Yes.
jump in with another question. I'm curious because we've talked about this a little bit before, you and I was wondering if you had any more insight on this. So you were mentioning that you were mentioning a lot of 2s, 3s.
Yes.
Is there any? It's kind of similar with. I mean, I asked this question mostly in vain because it's kind of similar to my group. Did they ever operate in a large capacity as what we might consider to be a single unit doing a single operation, or is it consistent with what you were saying that they're scattered all over the place doing all sorts of things, or was there ever anything that was very specific to them in a large number, or is it still just always going to be 2s and 3s or even individuals, or do you even know at this point?
I do and I don't. So they never really operated at anything less than company level. However, in April 41, they got stuck in Tobruk, and 3 battalions got stuck in Tobruk. The 1st battalion, the 2nd battalion, and the 4th battalion. So they did start to operate as regular battalions in Tobruk. They started to help with defense and actually operate there. But when it came to actual defending or actual operations, I'm trying to think. Not really alone. They formed a kind of conglomerate called Wall Force in 1942 with the Guides Cavalry. So the 1st Battalion joined together with Guides Cavalry, and they were second line of defense for El Alamein, running the defense of Wadi Natrun, which is just south of Mersa Matruh, the southwest of Cairo. But they didn't operate offensively ever as a unit together. If they were going up to the lines or going behind the lines, they were in really small groups. There is papers in the Imperial War Museum by R.J.P. Eden who discusses them doing some of this defense. And he had a platoon, and he was trying to cover and defend an area the size of Wales. So they were hugely dispersed and in those like small formations. And the platoon was quite a large amount for him to be looking after at that time, a number of men for the jobs they were doing. So not really, no, not together.
Do you know what the Germans made of them? Because they're not always the most diplomatic about non-white troops or colonial troops. I mean, some of them are. They give them respect where it's due, but there's general. Who the hell are these guys?
The Germans generally pretty much disregarded them, which was an advantage given they were working behind the lines and trying to do escape and evasion. At Benghazi, they actually captured them, disarmed them, and set them free. Didn't even bother to take them as prisoners. The Germans were particularly uninterested in the Senussi. The Italians, however, were brutal to the Senussi. They shot them on sight. They hung them. There was one example, they hung one from hooks. They murdered their families. There's massacres of a family. In fact, there's one LAF officer who most of his family was massacred in Benghazi, but a passing German officer stopped it. And that particular LAF officer went on to become the Minister of Defense in Libya after the war in the 50s. It was the Italians, the fascist Italians particularly, were utterly brutal to the Senussi, but not the Germans. In fact, the Senussi, there's evidence in various reports from British officers who talk about they don't understand why they're even fighting the Germans, because they're much of a muchness, they're absolutely fine, they've got no problems. And again, with the capture of Benghazi, there's various Senussi soldiers who just go, this is the Germans, I'm not bothering to fight anymore. Just, that's fine. I'll fight the Italians, but I won't fight the Germans. So they had some motivation problems with the Germans, but the Germans were pretty okay with the Senussi.
That's quite interesting, because you would have thought it would have possibly been the other way, but because you never really think about the Italians committing war crimes like that. Usually you say, oh, the Axis forces were killing and hanging, and then you go, oh, Germans. I suppose to a degree, because it's the Italians are the colonial masters of Libya. They're maybe looking down the line to say, well, we need to suppress this because otherwise we're going to be dealing with it later forever. And the Germans are like, we're only here for the British. We don't care about what happens here. Maybe. I don't know.
It's interesting you use the word suppression, because in the 1930s, one of the reasons that Idris is actually a refugee is because there's the suppression of the Senussi, and specifically the Senussi, because of their guerrilla warfare. So Graziani, who was the oh my goodness, the word has gone. The leader, for want of another word, because I can't remember, the marshal of colonial Libya, he was known as the Butcher of Fezzan, and he led again a brutal suppression of the Senussi, specifically the Senussi in the 30s. So this brutality from the Italians and the Italian colonials is a continuation of what was happening. And the Senussi view the whole thing as a 32-year war from a jihad that they declared in 1911 against the French, funnily enough. But they can see this whole anti-colonial all the way through to 1943. They see it as one long battle. But the British they thought they were British, they could use the British rather than anything else, because they would support them and they would underpin them. So yeah, but yeah, that suppression is something that's been going on. But I think there's also that element of you've got to keep the Senussi down, because yes, the Italians don't want them back up.
Yeah, I've just suddenly remembered that during the Italian colonial wars in the 30s in Ethiopia, they were dropping mustard gas from the aircraft to suppress the locals. So I'm just thinking about it. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised that they're doing the same sort of thing up in Libya.
Yeah, and Libya, funnily enough, I've been talking about 102 military mission, the 101 military mission, which of course you may know about with the East African campaign, that came from MIR as well. In fact, it was the same war establishment as 101 military mission. 102 military mission was raised under it too. So that whole putting Haile Selassie back on the throne of Ethiopia and Gideon Force and all of that, this is the parallel that was going on in Libya is 102 military mission.
So the force itself, how would you describe the LAF? Are they just a liaison force that is able to do extra things? Should they be included in a conversation about guerrilla warfare special forces? Like where do you, with where you're at with everything and how you're putting it and piecing it together, like is there a clear idea of where they fit as a force and like how they would be described?
Um, so this, I suppose, is part of the opinion and the argument that I formed for my thesis, but I think there's certainly holes in it that could be picked.
Well, share what you're willing to share.
Okay. Well, when I went into this research, I thought it was going to be black and white. I thought either they're regular or they're irregular, either or they're just doing one or the other, or they're working behind the lines or they're not. But because they are ubiquitous and they are everywhere and they are in there going out with the LRDG, going out with the SAS, going out and doing road watching, taking responsibility for bringing prisoners of war back to lines, helping airmen, they're doing what we would describe today as special forces work. However, I don't think it was viewed as special forces in the same way then as it is today. It was just the job of work you were doing, and it didn't matter whether you were regular or irregular troops. But I do think that it's unfair, perhaps, that they haven't been given credit for special forces. And I mean, you're talking when they were the ones doing the work that PPA, Popsky's Private Army, gets given the credit for. And they are given that credit because they're special forces. So just taking that for that particular role, yeah, then they're special forces. But for things like doing the guard of Mersa Matruh or getting stuck in Tobruk, or even they're getting involved with a deception operation going across called Operation Glamour from Jirabub to Jalo. That again is they're there with regular forces, again Free French, funnily enough, but the LRDG are there as well. So I suppose they should be given more credit than they are, but whether they are special forces or colonial gendarmeries, and colonial gendarmeries always did do paramilitary operations. So are they actually more on that colonial gendarmerie, but in that vein? And I suppose there's various questions in it, but I do think they need more credit for the amount that they did, and the hundreds, in fact thousands, if you look at the MI9 records for the whole of the Western Mediterranean, that they helped save of Allied troops.
Would it be do you think at the time, instead of like special forces, they considered themselves as, or they were considered by the British bureaucracy as irregulars rather than, official sort of regular military units? They're kind of irregular forces we can use for irregular work, and they do MI9 stuff for us from time to time, but we can also use them as infantry if we need to.
Yes, I think they didn't want to use them as infantry because they were in a very weird political situation, because the British authorities did not want to give any sanction to Idris, because they didn't want to end up with a situation like they had done in Palestine of making promises. So they didn't want to make any promise at all for the future of Libya. So they had to balance this very carefully. And they kind of tried not to use them as regular, just as liaison. And so they, in this ambiguous place, they had recruited large numbers of them from prisoners of war. So one of the recruiting officers, a guy called Norman Anderson, who was quite a well-known Islamicist and lawyer after the war, and he mentions in his memoirs, funnily enough, about how this is a very dodgy legal position, and about 50% of the LAF were prisoners of war who'd been recruited into it. So they didn't really want them on the front lines, and that's also for their own protection. So they're kind of being used here and there, but then there's evidence from De Winter, who wrote up the Special Forces in North Africa, so the National Archives book, where they've published the war diaries of the LRDG and L Detachment verbatim. So you can get that from the National Archives. And in it, there's mention that they were going to use the LAF instead of the SAS. So the implication being is that they are well enough trained, they are exactly what they want to use. So they are talking about using them, but I haven't got evidence that they actually used them, not on their own. So Operation Flipper, which you may or may not know about, which is where Jeffrey Keyes gets his VC because he attempts to attack Rommel's HQ. There are LAF guides there with them, bringing them across the desert. So they're there, but they're not really trusted enough on their own.
Liz, do you remember that question you were going to ask Chris?
Oh, yes, I know that you're interested in naval. You're a naval historian, aren't you? I looked you up and of course I can't remember. 'Cause
Yeah.
I was going to nerd snipe you because do you know why and how the LRDG were never direction found in the North African desert?
Was it something to do about radio transmitters from ships?
Yes, it was. They used merchant marine radio discipline. So when they were direction found, but the direction finders discarded it because they thought it was marine traffic and not land traffic.
You know, I'm going to be honest, that was a complete guess.
Well, it was a good guess.
Yeah, I just suddenly thought, hang on, how do you direction find? And I was thinking about, because I'm writing about RAF torpedo bombers at the moment. It's like, well, you have to bounce back to a radio system, a radio tower, and then you can triangulate your position. So if they're in the desert, you're going to need a radio transmitter. That's going to have to be by a ship off the coast, and just
Yeah, it was slightly less complicated. They just used the discipline.
yeah, awesome. That is really cool. I was going to say about Keyes. He was really unfortunate, and the only reason he got his, because he should have not gone, but his father, who comes up in my First World War research all the time.
Mm.
Oh, I'm gonna have to swear, was a complete bastard, especially to him. So he went in to try and prove to his. It was in a way he was kind of trying to prove to his father that he could be a man and be decent and be a hero.
Mm.
And apparently his father was quite nonplussed about it when he got his VC and died. And it's the whole thing's just sad.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been great if it worked, but
Yeah, if Rommel had been there, because it wasn't even his headquarters.
no. Although if they had got Rommel, they would have sent someone more competent to North Africa, and it would have been like Kesselring could have taken control himself, and it would have all been fine. Sorry, I promised I wouldn't rant.
But of course, the Rommel was helped hugely by the Americans. Did you know about this? About Bonifellas? Because I always find that amazing.
I'm trying to remember. It's been ages.
So Bonifellas was the American military attaché in Cairo, and he was extremely good and extremely diligent at his job. And he sent his reports to Washington. Unfortunately, the code in which he was sending it had been broken. And so his reports were being read in Berlin before they were being read in Washington, to the point that Rommel called him his good source. And they finally, well, Ultra knew there was a leak. And when they finally managed to work out where it was coming from, I think they changed the codes on the 29th of June, 1942. I know that because I've got a group of Senussi Arabs along with a large sort of 250 vehicles crossing the Qattara Depression and getting into Cairo on the 5th of July. And if the information that the Qattara Depression was navigable by vehicle had got to Rommel, then he may have decided to have gone round, and that could have been very bad.
Well, yeah, because that was Rommel's tactic. Because he's so untalented, he does the same thing every time. The British form a line, and then the Germans drive up. They can't go by sea, so they always swing by the right. All the Panzers are on the right, and they go round the British line.
Yep.
But with El Alamein, they couldn't because they thought the Qattara Depression was impassable to vehicles.
Yep.
And so they did a frontal assault, and it all went Pete Tong.
Yeah.
I didn't know, because my El Alamein knowledge comes from World at War. So I've got Laurence Olivier saying all that in my head.
Yeah, you see, no one actually knows about that one yet.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. So we dropping a bombshell there.
The information came from the Jirabob town major's war diary and the Free French online oral histories. And by piecing that and the guide's cavalry history. And then you were able to work out what happened and how many, because there were a small detachment of LAF there as well.
Wow.
But I think it's cool. Keeps me very excited. I said to my husband at one point, I'm sorry, honey, there are 6,000 men in our marriage, and quick as a flash, he turned around and go, "Don't worry, dear, they'll be gone soon." I don't think he realizes that they won't.
Yes. What he should have said is, "I will always be your first."
I shall tell him.
Well, it's interesting you were talking about. I was going to ask you a little bit more of a nerdy methodology question of
Yeah, yeah.
so it, as you said, you've had to piece these together, and as someone who's
hmm
kind of done the same in a few areas, what are what sources are you using? Like, what types of sources are you using? Because you've mentioned oral histories, but you've also mentioned some interesting war diaries from places that we probably wouldn't think of when we're trying to piece together a unit like this.
So let me be nerdy for a bit then,
Please
and
do.
this is also send some people to sleep. Again, my supervisor says he won't read this because he doesn't think, no. Anyway, so I come into history from as an archaeologist.
Mhm.
When I did my degree, and it's actually changed now, when I did my master's at Edinburgh, it was in social sciences, and so parts of the methodology that I'm comfortable with come from social sciences. So coming into something like this, I'm trying to go from the ground up rather than the top down. And the most obvious methodology for me is grounded theory, because you're taking whatever data that you can and you're grounding your theories in that data, essentially why it's called that. And it means that you go into the research without a really good question, which is fine in social sciences, but in history, normally you've got a question. And the
Mhm.
trouble was, I knew there was a gap, this massive gaping hole. And I also knew that the LAF are there in those top level political histories, but there's no foundational unit history and no foundations there. So to create those foundations, but also to try and negate that way of going, well, I might just be seeing what I want to see here. I've used the grounded theory to try and keep me on track and try and just look for whatever serendipitous sources come along, but trying to triangulate everything. So largely for whatever pieces of evidence I'm building my in my chronologies and in my frameworks, I'm looking for two, preferably three sources that corroborate it. And that gives me my grounded theory. So I've looked at everything I possibly can and random searches as well. Like the Jirabub town major, I know that Jirabub was really important to the Senussi because it was where the founder of the order is buried from the
Mm.
19th in the 19th century. So I know that's really important. So I'm looking at everything from Jirabub. And suddenly I read this and I go, whoa! So it does mean that potentially there's a lot more information out there, just hidden in random places. And even 102 military mission, I think one of the reasons it was so hidden is it's got nothing in the catalogues that links it to the LAF. It's actually called 102 Derna, and that's it.
Mm.
So knowing a little and just giving it a punt, it's like, okay, I'm old school. I'd go to the library and I'd look at the books either side and see what's there. And I think that today a lot of students are doing a lot of their research online and they don't look either side. But that's what grounded theory encourages you to do, to look around sideways and see what you can find. So yeah, war diaries have been the main thing. And ironically, the war diary for my grandfather's battalion is pretty non-existent. So the one person I certainly haven't found in the data is my grandfather. But I know whereabouts and what ish he was doing because I pulled his personnel records. And personnel records, of course, you can now get for free, officers from the Ministry of Defence, and they're going over to queue for soldiers at the moment. But yeah, I haven't found him. But I know what he probably was doing. But yeah, lots and lots of different things, and that's my geeky methodology in there.
I love it. I love it.
I'm still reeling that I should have asked myself a question before I started writing. I've just been.
Well, I mean, I'm the same way. You know, when my committee asked me, so what is your argument? And I'm like, I don't have one yet. You know,
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out what all these guys are doing
Go
and how
grounded
the,
theory.
I mean, because it's like, well, because like Chris asked me at the beginning of the episode, he was like, how'd your London trip go? And I was like, well, one of the things in my answer is that I came across a random thing, a random operation that my Polish troop is involved in, and I was like, I'm sorry, this is what, why, why is this in this folder, number one, and number two, looking at the time, at the date on it, I'm like, but they were pulled from the line. Wait, did where does this fit exactly? So I get it because but that's why I can't say, oh, I'm going to argue X, Y, and Z because I'm like, I don't know, because every time I turn a page, I'm like, oh, this is new. It's kind of like the Family Guy thing. Ooh, piece of candy. Ooh, piece of candy. It's kind of like that. And I'm
Yeah.
perpetually just James Woods finding candy along the road. So it's fine, but
I know
it's
that
fine.
feeling.
So you're not the only one, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's well because I'm not writing for academia, sort of academic stuff. So I mean, I'm for the work I'm doing at the moment. I'm just trying to unearth and tell the story of Bristol Beaufort squadrons. So it's sort of the okay. We'll start as a story. So in 1939, this is what's going on, and by 1945, everybody's dead, but they're now doing it this way, and then try and piece it together in the middle.
Yeah.
But maybe I should go away and think about how I'm doing this.
Oh, well, I keep getting told off for being too narrative. So yeah, that's where academia is different. You have to do that critical
Yeah.
analysis, and I can't narrative. Well, I had to, and then go from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'm dealing with the same problem. I did something and my advisor was like, just so you know, this would have been a great opportunity for you to do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, I mean, I thought about it, but I didn't think it was important at the moment, but I'll add it in there now. Thank you. So, any last minute thing there, Liz, that you would like the audience to take away before we head to our extra content, which if you have not become a member of Patreon, you definitely should because the next little bit of our extra content stuff is going to be quite fun. But is there anything else you would like us to know about the LAF at the moment?
No, other than I think they're really cool, because they're my boys, and I've really enjoyed the whole academic experience. But no, I think I have probably covered all the bases. I hope.
Chris, is there any last minute burning question that you have for her before we head to Patreon?
No, I've just found the whole thing really interesting. It's as I said at the beginning, this is something I have absolutely no idea about, and I think a good chunk of our listeners probably have never heard about. So, yeah, no, I'm just sat here on the edge of my seat, really enjoying it.
I hope so.
Alrighty.
The book will come later. You don't have to plug a book yet because I haven't written it. So
Well, that's fine. We'll plug the book when it happens. It'll be great.
we'll work on that later. One step at a time. I've got to actually get the PhD first.
That's fair.
And
That's fair.
our listeners will be able to buy that from our bookstore.com in, say, 10 years' time.
Exactly. Exactly. Whenever we can finally get one, yes, that's when it'll happen. Well, Liz, I do, on behalf of all of us here at the podcast, I do want to thank you for joining us. I know it can be a little weird being your first outing, but I believe you did just fine.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to our listeners who have made it this long. If you're new to the podcast, be sure and check out our other seasons. We have one called the Warsaw Uprising Day by Day season. We've also got our Narvik season that was done by Chris. And then, of course, we have the Auschwitz Liberation season and, of course, the First Transport season as well. We are currently working on another one. It's my little baby, and I may or may not have given a hint as to the geographical location at the beginning of the episode, so you'll have to use your keen senses of analysis to figure out exactly what I meant by that. But again, if you are new to the podcast, welcome. If you have not yet, please do like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get them. Give us that 5-star rating, as it really does help us out. And of course, another thank you to our fellow travelers, time travelers on our Patreon. If you are not a member of our Patreon, you should consider becoming one, because one, it helps support the channel. It helps us be able to figure out who we can talk to and how we can talk to them about what information and what research they are doing. And more importantly, you get some really cool extra bonus content episodes, not just for our regular seasons, but for our inter-season episodes. As I mentioned, we're about to head over to Patreon for a quick moment in time from what Liz was just describing to us. So it'll be very interesting, but you can't listen to it unless you're a member. So please do like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for being here. And Chris, is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners?
Actually, this is just a brief plug. Roger Morehouse got interviewed on History Rage podcast the other day, and they plugged our podcast and the Warsaw Uprising. So I think it's only fair to say thanks guys for plugging our podcast. And to our listeners, don't leave us. But if you fancy listening to another history podcast from time to time, do check out History Rage. They are really good. But stay with us because, but thanks for listening.